The first gunshot brought everyone in Mercy Falls to a standstill, but it was the second one that changed Tabitha Addison's life forever. She could still hear the echo of it in her nightmares, could still see her husband Franklin collapsing in the dust of Main Street, blood pooling beneath him as the bank robber fled. That was 2 years ago, in the spring of 1878, and since that day, she had sealed herself away from the world as surely as if she'd been buried alongside him. The small town of Mercy Falls, Wyoming Territory, had continued its quiet existence around her closed doors and drawn curtains. Tabitha kept to herself, running the small apothecary shop her husband had left her, speaking only when necessary, turning away well-meaning neighbors with polite but firm dismissals. At 26, she had resigned herself to a life of solitude, finding comfort in the predictable rhythm of her days and the absence of heartbreak that came with keeping everyone at arm's length, until Ethan Hayes rode into town. It was an unusually warm day in April 1880 when the stranger's horse kicked up dust on Main Street. Tabitha was restocking the shelves with tinctures when the bell above her shop door jingled. She turned to see a tall man filling the doorframe, hat in hand, trail dust still clinging to his denim trousers and faded blue shirt. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I heard this is the place for remedies." Tabitha straightened her apron, noting his lean build and the way his sandy hair curled slightly at the edges. His eyes were a striking blue, reminding her of the summer sky, but it was the long, jagged scar running from his right temple to his jaw that caught her attention most. "What ails you, sir?" she asked, her tone businesslike. "Nothing that needs curing right this minute," he replied with a slight smile. "I'm looking for work, and Sheriff Patterson mentioned you might need help with some repairs. Said your roof's been leaking since winter." Tabitha frowned. "Sheriff Patterson and his meddling. The sheriff is mistaken. I don't need any help." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes taking in the water stains on the ceiling and the bucket positioned in the corner. "Seems to me like that bucket disagrees, madam." She followed his gaze and felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I can manage my own affairs, Mr. Hayes, Ethan Hayes." He placed his hat back on his head. "And I don't doubt you can manage just fine, but sometimes an extra pair of hands makes the load lighter. My answer is no." "Good day, Mr. Hayes." Tabitha turned back to her shelves, arranging bottles with unnecessary force. She didn't turn around when the bell jingled again, signaling his departure, and she tried not to notice the strange emptiness that seemed to fill the shop after he left. That night, as Tabitha prepared for bed in her small home behind the apothecary, a knock came at her door. Startled for no one visited her after dark, she wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and approached cautiously. "Who is it?" she called. "Ethan Hayes, madam." "I brought something for that leaky roof." Tabitha's hand froze on the doorknob. "It's late, Mr. Hayes. Whatever you've brought can wait until morning." "Fair enough," came his reply, followed by the sound of something being set down on her porch. "I'll leave it here. Good night, Mrs. Addison." Curiosity got the better of her, and after she heard his footsteps fade away, Tabitha cracked open the door. On her porch sat a small wooden box containing several pieces of tin and some tools. Attached was a note, "For when you're ready to fix that roof," or "For when you're ready to let someone help you fix it." Tabitha closed the door firmly, but not before bringing the box inside. The next morning, she discovered Ethan had taken a job at the livery stable across the street. She watched from her window as he worked, his movements efficient and purposeful as he shoed horses and mucked stalls. Several times throughout the day, she caught him glancing toward her shop, but she quickly ducked away from the window each time. That evening, precisely at 8 o'clock, another knock came at her door. "Mr. Hayes, I told you yesterday, just checking if you've had a change of heart about that roof," he called through the door. "Rain's coming tomorrow." "I have not. Good night." "Good night, Mrs. Addison." The following night he came again, and the night after that. Each time, Tabitha refused to open the door, but each time she found herself standing closer to it, her hand resting on the knob a little longer. On the fifth night, when his now familiar knock sounded, she called out, "You're very persistent, Mr. Hayes." "Some might call it stubborn," he answered, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "My ma always said I was born holding onto a thought and wouldn't let go even when the midwife slapped me." Despite herself, Tabitha felt a smile tug at her lips. "What do you want tonight?" Same as every night. "To fix your roof before the next big rain ruins your store of herbs and medicines." She hesitated, then asked, "Why do you care about my roof?" There was a pause. "Everyone needs someone looking out for them now and again, Mrs. Addison, even those who think they don't." His words struck something deep inside her, a chord that had been silent for too long. Tabitha leaned her forehead against the door, closing her eyes. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I ask. Good night, Tabitha." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his voice stayed with her long after his footsteps had faded away. The next morning brought the promised rain, a steady downpour that quickly overwhelmed her makeshift system of buckets and pans. When a particularly heavy drip began directly over her precious supply of willow bark, Tabitha muttered a curse and marched across the street to the livery. Ethan was brushing down a chestnut mare when she entered, soaked to the skin and scowling. He looked up, surprise evident on his face, then quickly set aside the brush. "Your expertise is required, Mr. Hayes," she said stiffly, "if your offer still stands." His smile was warm enough to cut through the chill of her wet clothes. "Let me get my tools." Together they returned to the shop, where Ethan wasted no time climbing to the roof despite the rain. Tabitha handed up supplies as needed, watching as he worked methodically to patch the worst of the leaks. By mid-afternoon, the inside of the shop was dry, and Ethan was drenched but satisfied with his handiwork. "It'll hold for now," he said, accepting the towel she offered him. "But you'll need a proper fixing come better weather." Tabitha nodded, suddenly awkward in his presence. Thank you. What do I owe you?" Ethan rubbed his hair with the towel, considering her. "Dinner," he said finally. "Not today, not tomorrow, just sometime when you're ready." Before she could respond, he handed her back the towel and headed for the door. "I'll still knock tonight, Mrs. Addison, just to check if anything's still leaking." That night, when his knock came, Tabitha opened the door just enough to pass him a small basket. "I can't offer dinner," she said quickly before he could speak, "but I made extra biscuits and stew." Ethan took the basket, his fingers brushing hers momentarily. "Thank you, Tabitha. It's the least I could do, for the roof." She started to close the door. "Tabitha," he said, stopping her. "Sometimes it's all right to let someone in. Not all visitors bring pain with them." She met his eyes then, seeing the understanding there. "Some do, Mr. Hayes. Good night." The door closed, but something had shifted. The barrier between them had thinned just a little. Over the following weeks, Ethan continued his nightly visits. Sometimes he brought small offerings, a book he thought she might enjoy, a strange rock he'd found that reminded him of her eyes, fresh eggs from a farmer who owed him a favor. Sometimes he simply knocked, exchanged a few words through the door, and left. Tabitha never invited him inside, but she began to leave small tokens for him as well, jars of preserves, herbal remedies for his sore muscles after long days of work, once even a knitted scarf when the evenings turned cool. The town began to notice. Mrs. Henderson from the general store commented on it when Tabitha came in for supplies one day. "That Hayes fellow seems taken with you," she said casually, measuring out flour. "Fine man. Good with horses, better with children. Saw him helping little Tommy Miller after he fell last week. Carried him all the way to Doc Simmons." Tabitha merely nodded, unwilling to discuss the matter, but she filed away the information, adding it to the growing collection of things she knew about Ethan Hayes. One evening in late May, Ethan's knock didn't come. Tabitha found herself pacing near the door as 8 o'clock came and went, then 9, then 10. Telling herself she was merely concerned for a neighbor, she eventually put on her shawl and ventured out into the night. The town was quiet as she made her way to the livery stable. A light still burned inside, and she approached cautiously, knocking softly on the half-open door. "Mr. Hayes," she called. A groan answered her. Inside, she found Ethan sitting on a hay bale, one hand pressed to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. "What happened?" she gasped, rushing to his side. "Bar fight," he grimaced. "Not my fight, mind you. Tried to stop some cowboys from roughing up old man Jenkins. One of them had a knife." He attempted a smile. "Don't fuss, I've had worse." "Don't be ridiculous," Tabitha snapped, already examining the wound. "This needs cleaning and stitching. Can you walk to my shop?" With her support, Ethan made it across the street and into the apothecary. Tabitha worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with whiskey and preparing her needle and thread. As she began to stitch, Ethan watched her face, his eyes never leaving hers despite the pain. "So this is what it takes to get an invitation inside," he said softly. Tabitha's hand stilled momentarily. "You're hurt. I couldn't very well leave you bleeding in a stable. You could have fetched the doctor. Dr. Simmons is visiting his sister in Cheyenne. Now hold still." Ethan complied, wincing slightly as she continued her work. "You have steady hands. My father was a doctor in St. Louis. I learned a few things." She tied off the last stitch and began applying a salve to the wound. "What really happened, Ethan? The truth." He sighed. "Jenkins' boy, Peter, came to the saloon looking for his pa. Those cowboys had been drinking since noon, and they didn't take kindly to a colored boy interrupting their game. Things got ugly fast." His jaw tightened. "I don't abide by men who beat on children." Tabitha's respect for him grew. She knew Peter Jenkins, a quiet, intelligent boy of 14, who helped his father run the town's small cobbler shop. They were the only black family in Mercy Falls, and while most townsfolk treated them fairly, there were always those passing through who brought their hatred with them. "Is Peter all right?" she asked, bandaging Ethan's side. "Shaken up but not hurt. I got there in time." He caught her hand as she finished. "Thank you, Tabitha." She was suddenly aware of how close they were, of the warmth of his hand on hers, of the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. She stepped back quickly. "You should rest. You can. You can stay here tonight, on the cot in the back room." Ethan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Are you sure?" No, she wasn't sure at all. Opening her door to him, even just to her shop, felt like stepping off a cliff. But the alternative, sending him back to the cold stable with his injury, was unthinkable. "Just for tonight," she said firmly. "So I can check your wound in the morning." He nodded, understanding the boundaries she was setting. Just for tonight. But that night changed everything. As Tabitha lay in her bed above the shop, listening to the occasional creak from the cot below where Ethan rested, she realized how accustomed she had become to his presence in her life, to his knocking, his voice through the door, the small exchanges that had gradually become the brightest parts of her days. The next morning she found him already awake, moving stiffly as he tried to put on his shirt. Without a word, she helped him, her fingers careful around his bandaged side. "Thank you for taking me in," he said as she checked his stitches. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," he countered gently. Not anyone. You could have shut your door. You didn't. Tabitha busied herself with replacing his bandage, avoiding his gaze. Will you be able to work today? I'll manage. Mr. Dawson lets me set my own hours. He hesitated, then asked, May I come back tonight? For you to check the wound, I mean. She should say no. She should tell him to see the doctor when he returned. She should rebuild the walls that his presence had begun to crumble. 8 o'clock, she said instead. Don't be late. That evening, when Ethan knocked, Tabitha opened the door fully for the first time. She invited him into her small living quarters behind the shop, where she had prepared a simple dinner. If he was surprised by this development, he didn't show it, merely removing his hat and thanking her for her hospitality. They ate mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable one. Afterward, as she changed his bandage, Ethan finally spoke of what had been on his mind. I lost someone too, he said quietly. My wife, Sarah. 4 years ago, childbirth fever took her and our baby boy. Tabitha's hand stilled. I'm sorry. For 2 years I wandered, couldn't stay in one place, couldn't look at the same walls where we'd been happy. He met her eyes. I know what it is to close yourself off, Tabitha. To decide that loving once was enough for a lifetime. She swallowed hard. Then you know why it's better this way. No, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I know why it feels safer, but better. There's nothing better about being half alive. Is that what you think I am? Her voice rose slightly. Half alive. I think you're the strongest woman I've ever met, he answered, surprising her. I think you've carried your grief with dignity and courage, but I also think Franklin wouldn't want this for you. The mention of her husband's name from Ethan's lips startled her. You don't know what he would want. Maybe not. But I know what Sarah would want for me. She'd kick my backside from here to Kansas if she knew I'd spent years avoiding life because I was afraid of losing it again. Tabitha turned away, unwilling to let him see the tears that threatened. It's getting late, Mr. Hayes. You should go. Ethan stood, respecting her wish to end the conversation. At the door, he paused. I'll be back tomorrow night, Tabitha. I'll keep coming back until you tell me not to. After he left, Tabitha sat alone for a long time, thinking about walls and doors and the choice to keep them closed. The next night, Ethan brought wildflowers, and Tabitha invited him in again. The night after, he brought a chess set, and they played until midnight, discovering they were evenly matched. Each evening he knocked, and each evening she opened her door a little wider, stayed up a little later, shared a little more of herself. They spoke of their childhoods, hers innocent. Louis, the daughter of a respected doctor who had taught her his craft despite society's disapproval. His on a small ranch in Colorado, the youngest of 5 boys raised by a widowed mother whose strength had shaped his respect for women. They spoke of books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they had abandoned and those they still held. And gradually, they spoke of those they had lost. Tabitha told him how she and Franklin had come west for a fresh start, how his kindness had won her heart, how his death had left her adrift in a place that no longer felt like the adventure they had planned. Ethan shared memories of Sarah's laugh, of her talent for coaxing flowers from the driest soil, of the hopes they had for their child. But they also began to create new memories. They rode together on Sundays, exploring the hills around Mercy Falls. Ethan taught Tabitha to fish in the creek that gave the town its name, and she showed him how to identify healing plants in the meadows. When Sheriff Patterson organized a town dance to celebrate Independence Day, Ethan appeared at her door not with his usual knock, but with a tentative question. Would you do me the honor, Mrs. Addison? To the surprise of the entire town and perhaps to her own surprise as well, Tabitha accepted. That night, as they moved together under lantern light in the town square, Tabitha felt something she had thought forever lost: joy. Simple, Uncomplicated joy in the moment, in the music, in the solid presence of the man whose arms held her as if she were something precious. But joy, she discovered, brought fear in its wake. The day after the dance, when Ethan came to the shop to invite her on a picnic, Tabitha declined. "I have inventory to do," she said, not meeting his eyes. He studied her face. "Is that the real reason? Does there need to be another?" "No." Ethan placed his hat back on his head, "but I think there is." That night his knock came as usual. Tabitha considered not answering, considered pretending she wasn't home. But the thought of not seeing him, of not hearing his voice, created an ache she couldn't ignore. She opened the door. "I'm afraid," she admitted before he could speak. "I'm afraid of feeling this way again. Of caring for someone who might be taken from me." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "May I come in?" She stepped aside and he entered, but instead of taking his usual seat, he remained standing, his hat in his hands. "I can't promise you forever, Tabitha. No one can. What I can promise is today and tomorrow and as many days as we're given." He took a step closer. "I can promise to cherish each one, to never take for granted the gift of another sunrise with you." Tears filled her eyes. "And if it's not enough? If we have a month, a year, a decade, and then it ends? Then we will have had that month, that year, that decade." His voice was steady, his gaze unwavering. "And it will have been worth every moment." Tabitha looked at this man who had persisted, who had knocked night after night until she had finally opened more than just her door. She thought of the emptiness of the past 2 years, of the half-life she had been living, and of the fullness that had returned with his presence. "I'm still afraid," she whispered. "I know." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he cupped her cheek in his palm. "So am I." And then he kissed her gently, a question more than a demand. Tabitha answered by stepping closer, by letting her hands rise to his shoulders, by returning his kiss with one that spoke of awakening and hope and the courage to begin again. That summer flowed into autumn, and autumn into winter. Ethan continued his work at the livery, but he spent his evenings with Tabitha, first as a visitor, then as a suitor, and finally as a man who could not imagine being anywhere else. The townspeople watched the transformation of the widow who had closed herself away, noting the return of color to her cheeks, of lightness to her step, of warmth to her smile. There were difficult days. Days when the memory of Franklin's death weighed heavily on Tabitha, when she questioned her right to find happiness again. Days when Ethan rode out to the small grave where Sarah and their son rested, returning quiet and contemplative. But they faced these days together, learning that grief and love could coexist, that one did not diminish the other. As Christmas approached, Mercy Falls was blanketed in snow. Tabitha's shop was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and the scent of cinnamon and cloves filled the air as she prepared special holiday remedies for colds and coughs. On Christmas Eve, she closed early, anticipating Ethan's arrival for their celebration. When his knock came, she opened the door to find him standing in the gently falling snow, a small wooden box in his hands. "Merry Christmas, Tabitha," he said, his eyes reflecting the light from her windows. "Merry Christmas," she replied, drawing him inside out of the cold. "I have something for you, too." They exchanged gifts by the fire, a new leather-bound journal for her, filled with blank pages waiting to be written upon, a handcrafted pocket watch for him, to replace the one he had pawned months ago to buy medicine for a sick child. But as the evening progressed, Tabitha sensed Ethan had something else on his mind. "What is it?" she asked finally, as they sat side by side watching the flames. Ethan took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I've been thinking about permanence," he said slowly. "About promises and futures and taking chances." Tabitha's heart quickened. "Have you?" he nodded, then reached into his pocket and withdrew another small box. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He opened it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "It was my mother's. Before that, my grandmother's. Ethan." Tabitha whispered, her free hand rising to her throat. "I know we can't predict what tomorrow brings," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "But I know I want to face whatever comes with you beside me." He slid from the sofa to one knee. "Tabitha Addison, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tabitha looked at this man who had refused to be deterred by her closed door, who had knocked night after night until she had finally let him in, not just to her home but to her heart. She thought of the journey they had taken, from strangers to friends to lovers, and of the journey still ahead. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, Ethan Hayes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, his kiss a promise and a celebration all at once. They were married on New Year's Day, 1881, in the small church of Mercy Falls, with the whole town in attendance. Sheriff Patterson stood as Ethan's best man, and Martha Henderson, who had watched their courtship with approval, served as Tabitha's matron of honor. Peter Jenkins, recovered from his ordeal and flourishing under Ethan's occasional mentorship, played the violin as Tabitha walked down the aisle. As they spoke their vows, Tabitha thought of the closed door of her past and the open door of her future. She thought of Franklin and knew in her heart that he would be glad for her. And she thought of Ethan, persistent and patient, who had given her the courage to love again. Spring of 1881 found the newly married couple expanding the apothecary shop to include a small veterinary practice, combining Tabitha's knowledge of medicine with Ethan's way with animals. They worked side by side, building a life together one day at a time. And each night, no matter how late the hour or how tired they might be, Ethan would step outside their door, knock gently, and wait for Tabitha to open it with a smile. It was their ritual, their reminder of how their story began, and their promise to never take for granted the gift of opening doors to one another. 5 years later, on a bright summer day, Tabitha sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Ethan taught their 3-year-old daughter Lily to ride her first pony. Their infant son, James, slept peacefully in her arms, his tiny hand curled around her finger. As she observed her husband's gentle guidance and her daughter's delighted laughter, Tabitha reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the widow who had closed her door to love, believing that safety lay in solitude. And she thought of the persistent cowboy who had knocked every night until she finally let him in, bringing with him the chance to live fully again. That night, after the children were asleep, Ethan stepped outside as he always did. His knock came, gentle and familiar, and Tabitha opened the door as she always would. "Welcome home," she said, drawing him inside, into the warmth and light of the life they had built together, a life made richer by the courage it had taken to open a door once closed.